Richard, it seems like in this course, one of the things we keep getting asked is about, economics and gaps. So technical and economic gaps in execution of CCS for, our area here in Western Canada. I thought about this a lot, Richard, and I mean, there are certainly, from the surface facilities point of view, like, the capture side of things, I guess the major thing is that in terms of commercially based technology, I mean, we're still really into using solvents. There are, if you look at the stats, there are a few projects that are using membranes. A couple of people are trying solids, relatively small projects, not really commercial. So the challenge here is that the optimum solution from a capture point of view, it's not one size fits all. So here we've got one technology that's really commercial, and we're trying to make it one size fits all, and that's not true. So it's just like gas treating. We learned over decades that, as you remove H2S, for example, it's not always amine units. So same thing here. Solvent is certainly by far the leader in all of these projects, but it's expensive. It's like $60 to $120 US a ton as a levelized cost. And for small tonnage projects, that's very expensive. And I mean, you and I both know for this to get any traction, here's where the economic part comes in. And I mean, we've got we're going to have to get CO2 prices 50 to 80 bucks a ton, to get some traction here and then start going up from there. So we really, I guess the technical gap then is we're kind of stuck on at least one commercial type technology, but we really need more. And I want to say that, some of the solids technology is up and coming. There's something called metal organic framework, and that's definitely up and coming. And but it's still kind of expensive as well. I also want to say, like, in terms of solvent technology, I know there are going to be people watching us that say, hey, I represent a certain solvent technology, and we've made a lot of headway, and they have. There's heat integration and catalytic regeneration in these solvent-based technologies, and the number one op cost is regeneration, and certainly, that's been decreased a lot. But, there aren't any really good studies out there. People like me and you and some others, we really need to start doing some consistent study work, because one of the things that happens, at least on the surface side, is as you optimize your operating cost, you end up spending more capital cost. And that really hasn't, people have put forward all these solutions and they haven't really considered that.
Wayne, so, is there economies of scale to even the existing technology, or what you see future technologies? Like, what would the economies of scale be significant, or is it pretty much when you get to a certain flow rate or whatever, it's the cost is going to be pretty well constant after that?
No, I think there are economies of scale. One of the things that's happening to us in the gas processing industry is a lot of people who want to produce power. And I mean, they're not producing it en masse, not like a big power plant. They're producing power. For example, you get these projects where people want to mine for Bitcoin. So now they want to produce, 4 megawatts or 5 megawatts of power. And the way they do it, is with these gen sets or engines. And then they want to do carbon capture. And you're talking about less than, depending on the number of megawatts, but they're pretty small, less than 100 tons a day of CO2. So there's your economy of scale. Like when you start looking at, say, put in the only commercial technology we have on that one, I gave you a range. That's going to be your 120, maybe even a little more US dollars per ton. Whereas as I go up to large scale projects, over 1,000 tons a day, so 365,000 tons a year and more, bigger ones, that people are saying we have to do bigger ones, then you go right down to the low end of that scale and perhaps even lower. So it's, it's definitely an economy of scale thing. It's going to be hard for these smaller projects, at least right now, for sure. I mean, it's you know, like I said, the solid technology is up and coming. You know, we really need to take a harder look at solvents and people doing some consistent some work, like pre-feed studies that are done by, you know, one company that can actually show you and answer your question, where, in other words, take a 50-ton-a-day project, and then take a, you know, a 2,000-ton-a-day project and see what the differences are and what the different solutions might look like.
Yeah.
So it's good. I think the near horizon from the surface facilities point of view is going to be very interesting for these technologies.
Well, I would just like to address the subsurface portion, but I think you always have to start with the economics in here. I think it's interesting to note that in our poll, about 65 to 70% of the people said that the economics of CCS is probably the biggest single function. And, you know, I definitely agree with that. I think when you kind of evaluate the economics of CCS, it's a fairly complex subject. Even if you just narrow yourself to Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin, you know, it's a function obviously of CO2 tax or CO2 credits. It's a function of energy costs, so either electrical or oil price or even gas price. And so it's a complex function. But I think what we really need to do is kind of move away. A lot of numbers that are battered about in the press or whatever now are like their gross storage numbers, which are theoretical, the theoretical storage you have. But really, to get a meaningful number, you've kind of got to look at both economics and you have to look at the technical aspects at the same time. And so that means you're looking at your injection profile. So your injection rate versus time. And some of these wells are fairly substantial. You know, you're injecting a lot in a day. You know, to get a megaton, it's about, what is it, about 53 million a day of injection, and that's in one or two wells. So these are fairly substantial type of things, and you kind of have to look at it. I would say that my experience worldwide is that there's a huge difference between just mapping out, here's what the volumes in place are, the theoretical volumes in place, and what you actually are able to do. And that's a function of infrastructure, which I think you're a big part of, Wayne, is that I think that, because when I break it down into a conceptual model, roughly, if you look at Quest or ACTL or any of those other guys, the least the published results from the Pembina Institute and whatever are around about $50 or about $65 Canadian as a value, and that works out to about $50 a ton of cost on the capex point of view. If you look at your transportation, well, that kind of depends where you store this, right? And you know, I think if you were looking at oil sands, you'd obviously like to store it right below you, but you generally have to move to the west to get it. And again, I think that's going to be anywhere from about $2 to $4 a ton. And then with a rough number is about $8 a ton for storage capability. And so if you multiply the numbers, I think the big thing that you get is that there's a lot of economies of scale. You're going to need large volumes. You're going to need that CO2 hub. And we're going to need to look at long-term economics. But do you think, Wayne, back to you, do you think that $50 a ton, and that's both from, I guess, Shell Quest project, do you think that we can manage that in a range of facilities, or what does that really depend on?
Well, it's interesting because, you know, if you actually look at the data, and we're going to obviously present a bunch of it in our course, first of all, it's all over the place, and that's kind of interesting, but you do find some consistent data sets, and it looks like, from considering it all, that we need about $50 to $80 a ton, as a CO2 price to make a lot of these go, especially in our industry, gas processing and oil and gas. So that's where I see, and we're at $50 now, so we're getting there, but I see, certainly to capture a lot of it, we're going to have to get that top end. Not that I want to see a whole bunch more taxation or anything like that, but the fact is that, to get CCS to move and there has to be a value there that makes people want to do these projects. And I want to switch gears a little bit here, Richard. One of the other things we got asked a lot was about risk, and where we see the risks. And I think it might be more risk on your side of things. The risk on my side is, you want to choose the technology that is going to work. Now, that might be the expensive one, like we were just talking about, but from a risk perspective, we know it's going to work. There are certainly a few small technical risks, but those are being addressed. But I think maybe there might be more subsurface risk, and that might be something that people aren't really talking about. And you were alluding a little bit to it, and how much you have to inject and the reservoir itself. What are your thoughts on, the subsurface risk?
Well, I think it's kind of thing where the tail does wag the dog a little bit. When you look at your numbers, you got at least just initial model. I said like 50. What did I say? $4 a ton. So 50 for the carbon capture, $4 a ton for the transportation, and let's say I threw out $8 a ton for the injection or the storage component of it. But I think right now there's a little bit of apples and oranges going on, and that's between saline aquifers and existing reservoirs. And I guess I think both of them will need and fit into the whole solution. But I think you have to realize that we have a lot more information on our existing reservoirs. Even if we say we're not going to consider EOR, even if we say that, the bottom line is we know how these reservoirs have behaved and their associated aquifers for the last 50, 60 years, at least the big ones. And so you kind of have to balance the devil that you know versus the devil that you don't know. And that's really important. And so saline aquifers are often quoted in the literature is they're big, they're everywhere. Well, some of them are quite big, there's for sure. Like you look at the Cooking Lake Aquifer here in Alberta, whatever. They are large reservoirs, large aquifers, and same thing with southeast Saskatchewan. But but you got to realize some of these reservoirs are Cambrian in nature, and they have a lot more uncertainty associated with it. So although saline aquifers are some of them can have quite good continuity and good permeability, the real question is how many well bores, how much is your cost going to be? What's the reservoir continuity associated with that? And so saline aquifers are a little bit like an orange compared to an apple. Now, existing gas fields, on the other hand, you know quite a bit about injectivity on them or permeability and the continuity, because you've basically been producing from them or injecting into them for the last 50 years, some of them. But there's a disadvantage, and the aquifer people point this out, is that you're dealing with vintage wellbores, and so the risk of wellbore leakage is not inconsequential, and you have to count that. So I think the important thing is to kind of look at it in a balanced manner, but unfortunately, I think the death is in the details in some of these things. Is you need to look closely, and I think the thing that the course really stresses is this is the information, this is the equations that you need, like roughly. I mean, they're pretty simple equations, don't worry, but that how we process it, and this is how you would do, really what we're talking about is workflow here. And and not just superficial workflow, a little bit more than just, a little bit more in depth in terms of the workflow. Do you have anything you kind of want to wrap up with, Wayne?
What I want to do is you were kind of alluding there to almost a Western Canadian advantage. We've been doing acid gas injection for a long time and EOR projects, and it sounds like, one really good thing about Western Canada would be our adaptation to CCU. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think when you look at Gorgon in Australia and some of the places elsewhere in the world, I think, and if you look at EOR or just in general technology, it really helps having that background knowledge. Okay, what I always call is coffee shop knowledge. And I think you really hit it right on the nail. We've been putting acid gas in, and granted, it's not at the same rates that some of these CO2 are going to be. We've had hydrocarbon gas injection, we've had CO2 injection in Western Canada. So that gives us a knowledge base to work with. And I don't think anybody should underestimate that experience. On the other hand, whether you like it or not, or where you are on the whole environmental thing, we have significant oil and gas reservoirs here. We have 450,000 wells. So we have a lot of infrastructure and pipelines. We've got experience with that. The nice thing is that in Western Canada, you're in a tectonically inactive area, so you're tectonically stable. And what also is good is that we have good public knowledge on individual wells. So it's easy. I can say, well, this is the failure rate, and somebody can check on that. And we have really good public data on individual wells, as well as a good regulatory environment. And the other thing that I think we've got going is in Western Canada is we have good and bad is we have large stationary sources of CO2. And so I think it allows planning really to, you can draw pipelines in different directions, and you're not going to be changing things that much dramatically in the future. So I think we have a lot of positives in this, and I don't think we should underestimate that experience and how things develop. Do you have anything to say?
No, I think, I could, from the surface facilities point of view, I'll keep it quick. It's the same kind of thing, right? We've been sweetening gas, capturing CO2 and H2S for a long time. Again, not in nearly, the same capacity, but certainly been doing it. That means we got a lot of experience with it. As I said, the only real gap is what we have a lot of experience with is still a little bit on the expensive side, but in Western Canada, we've always been very entrepreneurial in coming up with more solutions. And we were some of the people that jumped on acid gas injection as very popular, for example, early in the game. And so it just means, I think, that from this capture technology point of view, that I think you'll find some really great technologies. Like, it's a fast-moving space, and I think we're going to see a lot come out of Western Canada for that as well. But well, we can leave it there and leave some for the course, as it were. But no, thanks for chatting, Richard. I always wanted to throw some of those at you. So
okay, you too. Take care.
You too.
I'm logging off now.